Playing World of Warcraft seriously may sound like it's not something for you, but in this video I'd like to explain why putting slightly more mental effort into your characters can dramatically improve the feeling of reward the game offers and will keep you interested in playing the game more regularly than ever before. Many people seem to want to take the next step towards competitive content, but think that doing so requires some skill or edge they simply can never possess. Today I will explain 5 easy steps that any max level player can follow towards being a better version of themselves in-game and immediately begin contributing in an above-average way towards any progression content the game offers, including Mythic Rating and Mythic Plus dungeons. Let's begin. Step 1. Keybinds and Muscle Memory. You must keybind every single ability that you will press regularly, especially in a way that makes sense for you if you want to maximize your character's performance. Understanding how to map your keys and their respective abilities is something most people overlook, but simply having your abilities on the default keybinds is not enough to consider it more efficient than clicking them. There are multiple approaches to keybinding, all of which fall somewhere on a gradient between keyboard hand dominant or mouse hand dominant. When I first started playing WoW, I used to prefer keyboard hand dominant keybinds, but after I eventually made the jump to the Razer Naga mouse, I have placed a majority of my actions onto my mouse hand, so much so that my left hand does barely anything regularly. You'll want to place a few of your binds for your abilities that are not in a difficult way to reach and in a logical outline that you can follow without any mental effort. Once you get used to this, you will realize that this is the true benefit to keybinding, as you do not require hand-eye coordination to assure you are pressing them any longer. Muscle memory will become the most important factor here, and it will take some time to adjust to this. However, once you do, you will see immediate dividends. If you aren't sure where to start, let's examine how I have laid out my keybinds. In terms of movement, I have left the default methods untouched. W, A, S, and D still function as they would, as do E and Q. Most of the movement I do in WoW is done, however, with my mouse, again using the default actions of holding both mouse buttons in. The main reasons I have retained both methods is because I play classes that often require constant targeting and clicking of frames, which makes it difficult to move without any key presses. An alternative is unbinding the A and D key from turn and replace them with the Q and E key defaults of strafe. This is common in PvP, as you can never afford to turn slowly with the keyboard. This then offers up much more convenient keys in Q and E for reactionary abilities like perhaps interrupts or defensives. In terms of basic rotation, on any character I bind given this priority. The number 1 key is either a major CD on healers or a ranged pulling type ability on tanks. For example, Lay on Hands on Holy Paladin or Death's Caress on Blood Death Knight. The 2 and 3 keys are typically core rotational abilities that are AoE driven, but this has developed into spare keys on many classes. For example, I put Consecrate in these slots for Prot Paladin and Blood Boil for Blood Death Knight. The 1 through 3 keys are buttons I use on my left hand exclusively, as well as shift modifiers when needed on the bar directly above. The rest of the main bar, starting with 4 and onwards, are all buttons on my mouse hand, thanks to the Razer Naga. Number 4 is my most used ability on all tanks, typically for resource building like Heartstrike. The 5 key is typically an auxiliary ability that also deals with resources like Marrow Rend. 6 key is typically your main spender, an ability that is your go-to core spell for your class. These buttons have developed as the most important 3 keys on either hand, as they are naturally where my thumb rests and require the least effort to press thousands of times a day. They are also historically the most modified, using either shift or other control variants for similar abilities. For example, 4 used to be Sunder Armor, and shift 4 would be Heroic Strike from the early WoW warrior tank model. 7, 8, and 9 are key utility abilities in almost every situation, along with their modifiers. On my Death Knight, 7 is Death Grip, key 8 is the standard taunt, and 9 is Interrupt. Outside of those, I always put key cooldown abilities on Z, X, C, and V, and their shift modifiers are typically for auxiliary CDs or potion and healthstone usages. They will eventually become your most important keybinds, so make sure they are easy to press and being used properly. I also have movement abilities and things like mounts keybound to my mouse wheel click. This button is often underused and something anyone can make big use out of even without a Naga. Any abilities I have to place like Death and Decay, I put on the 1 key on my Naga, which can be found on the far right side of my main bar on my screen. Once you get comfortable with your keybinds, you won't even notice that they are there, and it will be as natural for you as your brain and typing, requiring no hand-eye coordination or thought. Number 2 is weak auras and UI setup. Once you're comfortable using your abilities, the next step is making sure that you're using them as often as possible and as optimally as can be done. This is the first big mistake I see your average player making, as without proper cooldown tracking, it's easy to fall into a situation where you're using key abilities 50% less than someone else for no reason other than a lack of knowing they're usable. From my perspective, the add-on weak auras is mandatory for anyone following my advice, as the add-on can do some simply amazing things. The primary function I use it for is tracking key CD timers and procs, however. If you do nothing else, I implore you, use it to track your CDs and abilities. You do not even need to have any real knowledge of how to use the add-on to do this, as there is an entire database of pre-made auras at the website wago.io, which will be in the description. You can find pre-compiled auras there or on YouTube and learn to tweak them as you like. The goal is to have a very recognizable area of your screen showing exactly what key abilities or procs are ready, down to the second, and this can be easily attained with no real effort or knowledge of the actual add-on. Once you get this type of information tracked, it will quickly change your in-game life. You will see patterns align between your different procs and CDs and begin to associate their different combinations with different increases in DPS or HPS. Recognizing these types of character patterns is the first major hurdle to being able to compete PVE competitively, and without it, you will improve at a significantly slower rate. The most common question I get when streaming or making videos is what add-ons I use and where the rotation and CD trackers come from. This makes me realize that a significant portion of the community do not realize how important the weak auras add-on can be, and to anyone watching and still not using it, I will reiterate that playing my character the way I do would simply be impossible without the tracking and devices I have set up for myself with it. If you are at all interested in being the best you can be in this game, take some time to look at your class's representation on wago.io. You'll even find things like boss mods and other tools previously designed by entirely separate add-ons. Step 3 is repetition and experience. Once you feel you have a good foundation for actually playing your character, the next step will be playing it in content that will regularly challenge your ability. Running things like Heroic, Dungeon, and LFR often can be fun or relaxing, but they do almost nothing in the way of teaching you how to care about your play and maximize your performance regularly. The best advice I can give anyone is to do a difficulty of content that's about 70% of what might be doable for your character. This is easiest to understand when examining rating, as Heroic is the only option if you're after Mythic, etc. Practicing in Heroic under normal circumstances will help you learn the basics of the fight, but also how your character will need to approach the mechanics. It's more complicated in Mythic Plus, but considerably easier to get experience, as you can do dozens of them a week and still be gaining benefit. Aim for anything 10 or higher to get a feel for the 3 affixes and try your best to learn ways that your class can interact with them. Doing this will help you learn exactly where to use potions, cooldowns, defensive CDs, as well as give you the experience needed to make up for your group mates' potential mistakes and help everyone else improve around you. It will also help you solidify your hold on the first 2 steps, as the more you get used to using your keybinds and weak auras in challenging situations, the more you'll improve over time. If you are new to competitive play, you will quickly realize why experience is the #1 thing holding you back, and once you have it, you will quickly realize that you can essentially outplay anyone without it, and eventually carry an entire group because of it. One of the biggest reasons I hear most people think they are unskilled in a game like this is simply because they lack the confidence or time needed to get the experience that will make them a more established player. So feel free to team up with friends or offset this in any way possible. Step number 4 is analyze and compare. At this point, you should have a very comfortable outlook on your performance, and this will ultimately be your downfall when it comes to competition. Many people I raid and do dungeons with think that because they are experienced players successfully completing content, that their growth is now capped. You need to immediately break out of that mindset if you're going to continue improving, because literally daily there is something to be learned and gained within this game and its subsequent community. Instead of falling into this trap, use websites like Warcraft logs and Wipefest to see exactly what you can do and compare what you're doing to others. When looking at logs, you can see literally every single action taken by yourself, other players in your group, or even the bosses and environment you are encountering. Analyzing the logs has a bit of a learning curve, but the major feature I like to take advantage of the most is using the bulk of data to compare myself to other DKs doing the same thing. One way or another, arming yourself with knowledge in this game is the most important way to take your interest to the the next level of competition. Outside of just numbers, I would encourage anyone who raids or does dungeons to look at the point of view videos of their class and role on various YouTube channels. Seeing how others approach the fight mathematically with logs can help, but sometimes it's more important to see where they are standing, what their UI looks like, and how the rest of the group may be reacting to them and the mechanics. This principle is the main reason I enjoy pugging 5-man so frequently, because if you never see anyone else's perspective, you would develop very bad habits and get stuck using the same outdated technology and knowledge when the tools you may be missing are readily available within the community. And last but not least, step 5, tweak and iterate. So with the previous 4 principles, you will have doubled your confidence, doubled your gear, and doubled your DPS. But in order to play the game competitively, you need to also double your progression with respect to the community around you. Even if you are the most confident and experienced player in the game, if you aren't competing with other players playing your class and role, then you aren't actually competing. An experienced player who does their share of comparison will immediately realize that not everyone plays their character the exact same way, and occasionally you will find someone heavily against conventional wisdom yet still outperforming everyone else. This is because they iterated on gameplay and made adjustments that made sense to them, usually on a situation-to-situation basis. Once you are comfortable enough with the core mechanics of the content, it's time to begin finding subtle ways you can improve and give you and the group the edge it needs. This often includes using talents you wouldn't normally consider or changing things like legendaries or trinkets regularly. A significant number of players who raid and raid regularly at a high level get stuck between step 4 and 5, but step 5 is what makes you a truly great player instead of just a great one. If you're not willing to use the knowledge and experience you have gained to recognize faults in your approach or gameplay, then you will plateau in your success and eventually go backwards as those around you continue to iterate and improve. A great competitor will study the trends happening weekly and look deeper into the stats they were analyzing for possible connections to these trends. Maybe all of a sudden people are switching legendaries, but conventional wisdom says the ones they are using are lower tier. Check to see why and compare the efficacy to your setup. Try their setup yourself and see if you can replicate any improvements. In dungeons, when you are watching videos, you might be seeing 9 of 10 players using their CDs in the same way, but the one time you see a 10th player use them elsewhere. Try to understand why and why that may have been done to make an improvement. Was it a mistake or was it an actual iteration, and can there be something you could learn from it and replicate yourself? The most important part of improving your play daily in this game is to never get stagnant and always be hungry for improvement. Always have an open mind when it comes down to improving your character, and check your improvements weekly based on your peers with websites like Warcraft logs. If at any point you find yourself saying, well, that's just what this guide says to do, so it must be right, you have already failed this step. So, these are my 5 steps towards being a competitive PVE player in World of Warcraft. I made this video because I know many people who seemingly enjoy playing WoW and watching others play it, but don't seem to want to make the jump properly themselves. I guarantee you that if you follow these steps and work daily to make yourself better, you will immediately get more reward from the game and will find yourself rarely falling into the feeling of there being nothing to do inside the game itself. I encourage everyone who plays this game to realize that you do not need to play it all day, every day to be the best you can be in it. And there are ways you can maximize your time spent where you are getting better gains than the average player. I need to remind you that this is not a sport. It does not require freak genetics to compete in the top 1 percentile. It just requires a bit of luck and a lot of experience and dedication. Any player can be a top raider, and the things often holding them back are simply within their own head and ambitions. If you have ever said at any point, man, I wish I was good enough for X content, or I can't believe how much better this player is doing than I am, then follow these 5 steps and you will see immediate improvements. If you don't, ask any questions you have in the comments section and I will do anything I can to help you improve. Remember, the strongest part of this game is the community element. The answers are always out there. You just need to find a way to hear them in a way that makes sense for you. So thanks for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.